In hip-hop, not every feud erupts into a diss track or a public meltdown. Some rivalries are cold wars, quiet, strategic, and loaded with unspoken meaning. Kendrick Lamar and Jay-Z represent two different eras, two different codes of the game. But beneath the surface, fans and insiders have sensed a quiet tension, a mutual respect laced with subtle rivalry. From cryptic lyrics to missed collaborations and competitive moves, this is the story of a silent chess match between two of hip-hop's most powerful minds. When Kendrick Lamar burst onto the mainstream scene with Good Kid, b.i.g, it didn't take long before industry titans started paying attention, including Jay-Z. Though Jay had already passed the torch to Kanye publicly, Kendrick's rapid rise challenged that narrative. Huff watched carefully, respecting Kendrick's lyricism, but knowing the game well enough to sense the threat. When Jay-Z jumped on the "Bitch, Don't Kill My Vibe" remix, it felt more like a test than a cosign. It was Jay's way of stepping into the arena, not to mentor, but to measure. Jay-Z has always positioned himself as a godfather of lyrical rap, controlled, metaphorical, and deeply calculated. But Kendrick's raw emotional delivery and multi-layered verses began drawing critical comparisons. Fans on forums and YouTube comment sections started debating who the better lyricist really was. Though Jay never addressed it directly, insiders say he was not thrilled about the rising narrative that Kendrick was the next lyrical king. Jay's decision to hold off on a full collaboration spoke volumes. Not beef, but boundaries. Jay-Z, through his Roc Nation imprint, made moves to align with nearly every rising force in hip-hop, except Kendrick. While Jay brought artists like J. Cole into his camp and kept close tabs on industry shifts, he kept a calculated distance from TDE. Sources claim Hov didn't want to be overshadowed by an artist he couldn't control. While he publicly praised Kendrick's artistry, behind the scenes, it was all chess. Business is war, and Kendrick wasn't part of his army. Kendrick Lamar has always shown a respectful tone when mentioning Jay-Z. In interviews, he called him a blueprint and an icon. But Kendrick never seemed interested in being mentored. He took the remix with Jay-Z, sure, but refused to be boxed in as a protege. This resistance wasn't loud. It was strategic. Kendrick wanted his legacy to be independent of any cosign. His focus was on building TDE and crafting his own kingdom, not fitting into someone else's dynasty. Kendrick is no stranger to sending subtle messages through lyrics. On songs like King Kunta and Control, fans speculated whether lines were aimed at elder rap statesmen like Jay-Z. Kendrick never confirmed it, but the tone was clear. He was ready to claim the throne, no matter who was sitting on it. Meanwhile, Jay's silence was equally strategic. Rather than clap back, he ignored, knowing full well that engaging would legitimize the challenge. When Kendrick won the Pulitzer Prize and Jay-Z was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, fans couldn't help but draw comparisons. These weren't just accolades. They were markers of legacy. Kendrick was becoming the first in new spaces Jay-Z had never entered, while Jay continued building a billion-dollar empire. Both men moved like kings, but with different kingdoms. They never dissed each other, yet their parallel paths always hinted at an unspoken rivalry, one that still simmers under the surface. Jay-Z has long had a complicated relationship with the Grammys. While he's won many, he's also boycotted and criticized the institution. But when Kendrick was famously snubbed in 2014 after Good Kid, b.i.g lost to Macklemore, Jay's silence was noticeable. Fans expected the hip-hop mogul to speak up for lyrical excellence, especially since he had once been the victim of similar snubs. But Jay stayed quiet. Some saw this as a subtle flex, a move to let the younger generation fend for themselves. Kendrick was clearly a rival now, not an underdog to protect. Kendrick has worked with many top-tier artists, but one label he's never infiltrated is Roc Nation. Jay-Z has offered management to artists across genres, Rihanna, J. Cole, even sports stars, but never Kendrick. Industry insiders suggest that Jay didn't want a creative powerhouse like Kendrick disrupting his ecosystem. A partnership would have been historic, but instead, a wall remained. Whether ego, strategy, or protection of legacy, Jay made sure to keep TDE at arm's length. The tension wasn't about hate, it was about hierarchy. When Kendrick dropped his now legendary verse on Big Sean's Control, calling out nearly every major rapper by name, Jay-Z was one of the few left unmentioned. Many speculated it was a sign of respect, others believed it was strategic omission. Still, Jay-Z never responded, not even with a Subliminal. Instead, he released Magna Carta, holy grail around the same era, doubling down on his art collector billionaire image. Jay let his wealth and legacy do the talking. No bars, just business. On To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick Lamar cemented himself as not just a rapper, but a movement. Songs like King Kunta and All Right declared ownership of his throne. While never directly naming Jay-Z, Kendrick's verses suggested a rejection of industry kingship as defined by money and mogul status. He rapped for the people, not the boardrooms. This placed him in stark contrast to Jay's tailored luxury persona. Kendrick wasn't just building a discography, he was building a resistance, and it sent a message to the throne. Kendrick's Damn was a creative and commercial success, winning him a Pulitzer Prize, a first for a rapper. While Jay-Z was dropping exclusive albums on Tidal and crafting billion-dollar deals, Kendrick was redefining the very definition of hip-hop prestige. The move sent shockwaves across the music industry. Jay-Z congratulated him publicly, but the undertone was clear. Kendrick was stepping into history books that even Jay hadn't touched. The tension remained unspoken, but it was impossible to ignore. Live performances have been a battleground in hip-hop legacy. Kendrick's Grammy performances were revolutionary, politically charged, artistically daring, unforgettable. Jay-Z, always polished and poised, approached performances like board meetings. But Kendrick's fire on stage made a statement. His art was rebellion, not just entertainment. When fans started comparing Kendrick's live energy to Jay's classic showmanship, it signaled a generational shift. Kendrick wasn't just walking in Hov's footsteps, he was carving new roads. On tracks like What It Feels Like with Nipsey Hussle, Jay-Z made subtle lyrical choices that critics interpreted as light jabs at younger MCs taking themselves too seriously. Without naming names, many felt Kendrick was among the targets. Jay has always taken pride in his longevity and approachability in corporate spaces. So, when Kendrick leaned heavily into black activism and radical themes, Jay's critiques seemed like warnings. Don't burn the bridges I built. Jay was making it clear. Staying on top requires more than passion. Behind the scenes, there were rumors that Roc Nation once floated a management offer to Kendrick, one he allegedly declined. Insiders say Kendrick felt the terms weren't in his favor and didn't match his artistic autonomy. The rejection wasn't loud, but it was firm. That snub echoed through the industry, signaling that Kendrick would never play second to a mogul's empire. For Jay, who prided himself on recognizing greatness early, it was a quiet hit to the ego. Music critics love comparing legacies, and nothing stings like comparison. Jay-Z's Blueprint era represented dominance, wealth, and cultural authority. Kendrick's To Pimp a Butterfly challenged that blueprint, promoting vulnerability, community, and systemic criticism. When outlets began placing Butterfly above Jay's classics in greatest albums lists, fans on both sides clashed. Kendrick was rewriting what greatness looked like. Jay wasn't losing, but for the first time, his definition of iconic was being revised. Kendrick rarely speaks on Jay-Z, and that's not accidental. He's spoken about Eminem, Tupac, even Kanye. But when it comes to Jay, there's a silence that speaks louder than words. Insiders say Kendrick intentionally avoids engaging with Jay in interviews to keep the mystique alive, or maybe to avoid the politics. He respects Hov, but doesn't want to become a pawn in the legacy war. For Kendrick, silence is strategy. When Kendrick released Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, it was an emotional purge, therapy on wax, but beneath the vulnerability were bars that felt like warnings. His lyrics about generational trauma, fake kings, and untrustworthy leaders had fans connecting dots to hip-hop royalty. Many believed Kendrick was pushing back on the idolization of moguls who had long benefited from the system they once opposed. The unspoken shot across the throne's bow didn't go unnoticed. In 2023, Kendrick dropped a surprise freestyle during a pop-up performance in Compton. While it wasn't officially released, fan footage captured lines about fathers of the game becoming followers. It sent the internet into a frenzy. Was Kendrick firing again? Some believed it was a spiritual sequel to Control. No names, but the energy? Director. The fans ate it up, and Jay stayed silent again. Jay-Z has long positioned himself as the GOAT, and much of hip-hop agreed. But when Kendrick began getting the same label, tension subtly crept in. Jay had carved out his throne carefully, and Kendrick's ascension wasn't part of the blueprint. At public events, Jay began emphasizing his business acumen more than his bars, a pivot some saw as a way to sidestep the new lyrical king's shadow. When titles are on the line, silence is strategy. In his famed Rap Radar interview, Jay-Z talked about hip-hop's direction and upcoming artists. Notably, Kendrick's name was barely mentioned. Some said it was out of respect, others felt it was dismissal. The lack of acknowledgement felt pointed, especially as Jay name-dropped other rising stars. It felt like Jay was drawing a line. Kendrick was no longer upcoming, he was now competition. And sometimes, the most powerful move is omission. Kendrick once rapped, "I'm the closest thing to Jay." But in later years, his tone changed. He evolved from revering Jay to positioning himself against that archetype. On The Heart Part 5, Kendrick dissected fame, fake leaders, and public perception, all pillars of Jay's empire. Kendrick wasn't dethroning Jay, he was redefining what a throne looked like. He'd learned from Jay and chosen a different path. Fans waited for a Kendrick x Jay-Z performance at the Grammys for years. And in 2021, when both were present, anticipation peaked. But nothing happened. No handshake, no photo, no shout-out. Fans were left speculating, was this tension, scheduling, or intentional silence? Their absence together was as loud as any bar either had dropped. It seemed both men wanted to preserve their individual mystique rather than co-sign one another publicly. When Kendrick teamed up with Baby Keem for Family Ties, he made it known. "I'm not a trending topic, I'm a prophet." Some fans believed he was distinguishing himself from rappers chasing status, a group many believe includes Jay-Z. The track had Kendrick calling out the overnighters and industry chameleons, once again choosing legacy over optics. Was he alluding to mogul rappers with shallow bars? That's how some fans read it. Despite all the indirect shots, Jay-Z hasn't responded to Kendrick. Not with a bar, interview, or post. For a man who once bodied Nas with Takeover, this is uncharacteristic. But that's Jay's current power. He no longer punches down. Or maybe he's just biding time, watching Kendrick fight a legacy battle from the shadows. Jay knows how to let silence stir the pot. Even in their differences, Kendrick has adopted elements of Jay's blueprint, especially when it comes to ownership and control. His PG Lang platform echoes Jay's early days with Rockefeller and Roc Nation. Kendrick's control over his career mirrors what Jay fought for decades ago. Their styles differ, but the foundation is familiar. Kendrick is building a legacy, just not in Jay's image. One source who worked the 2018 BET Awards claimed Kendrick and Jay were briefly in the same VIP area and didn't speak. While Beyoncé exchanged pleasantries, Jay allegedly kept his distance. No photos, no interactions. It was a moment that fueled theories. Were they avoiding unnecessary headlines, or was it quiet tension boiling over? In hip-hop, silence can be warfare. Kendrick's performance at the 2018 Grammys opened the show with a firestorm of imagery and lyricism. While Jay-Z sat in the front row, Kendrick's bars about fake leaders and revolution hit hard. It felt like Kendrick wasn't just performing, he was reclaiming hip-hop's soul from corporate hands. Jay applauded, but the energy between them? Cold. The performance drew a line in the sand. By 2024, fans had accepted that a Jay-Z versus Kendrick Lamar collaboration might never happen. But the real question was why. Both claimed respect for each other, but their actions told another story. One built an empire, the other a revolution. And in their differences, a Cold War quietly raged on. Hip-hop thrives on competition, and as Kendrick continues to rise and Jay stays entrenched in billionaire status, both men carry crowns, but for different kingdoms. Jay-Z represents the institutionalized power of rap. Kendrick represents its conscious rebellion. And while fans want a face-off, the real war is in ideology. Fans still dream of a Kendrick x Jay-Z collaboration, or even a lyrical battle. But maybe that's not the point. Their tension reflects two eras, two ideologies, two visions of hip-hop greatness. Whether they ever share a stage or studio, the friction between them fuels the culture. And that unspoken rivalry, it's what keeps hip-hop alive.